He believed replacing her would solve the problem. But before the sun set over his mansion, he was about to discover that some people never leave because they stop caring. They leave because they believe no one should carry their pain. Ethan Kong had built an empire where every decision was expected to be immediate, every order obeyed without hesitation, and every weakness buried beneath discipline. The sprawling estate overlooking the Hudson River reflected that philosophy perfectly. Every light turned on at exactly 6 o'clock. Every fresh flower appeared before breakfast. Every suit waiting in his dressing room was pressed without a wrinkle. For 3 years, those routines had existed so flawlessly that Ethan had stopped noticing the person responsible for them. Naomi Carter was simply there, moving quietly through the mansion like a gentle breeze no one acknowledged until it disappeared. On a gray Tuesday morning, she did. Ethan stepped into the dining room expecting the familiar aroma of freshly brewed coffee prepared exactly the way he preferred, rich but never bitter, waiting beside the morning reports his attorney delivered before sunrise. Instead, a different housekeeper stood awkwardly beside the table, clutching a silver tray with trembling hands. The coffee was cold. The reports were missing. The silence felt strangely unfamiliar. "Where is Naomi?" Ethan asked without looking up from his phone. The new maid swallowed nervously before answering. She won't be coming back, sir." Ethan barely reacted. "Then human resources can process the paperwork. Hire someone else." To everyone in the room, his response sounded completely ordinary. Staff members lowered their eyes and continued working. In a mansion filled with dozens of employees, one resignation should have meant nothing. People came. People left. The estate always moved forward. By noon, another replacement had already arrived. Ethan signed the employment documents with the same expression he used when approving supply invoices. "No one is irreplaceable," he said quietly before returning to a conference call that involved millions of dollars and problems far larger than a missing housekeeper. Yet the mansion refused to cooperate with that belief. Lunch arrived 20 minutes late because no one knew the chef always adjusted Ethan's meal whenever afternoon meetings ran long. His young son refused to touch his favorite grilled cheese sandwich, pushing the plate away while asking only one question. "Where's Miss Naomi?" Even the old golden retriever wandered through empty hallways, stopping outside the small staff corridor before lying down beside a closed white door that had never been locked until that morning. By evening, tiny mistakes had multiplied into something impossible to ignore. Ethan's medication wasn't beside his glass of water. His mother's framed photograph had disappeared from the library mantel because the new maid assumed it belonged in storage. A charity donation that always left the house on the first Tuesday of every month remained forgotten on the kitchen counter. None of those things appeared on schedules. None existed inside employee manuals. Someone had simply remembered. Someone who was no longer there. Ethan stood alone in his study as rain tapped softly against the enormous windows. For the first time in years, the mansion didn't feel peaceful. It felt empty. He reached for the evening tea Naomi always prepared before realizing there wasn't one waiting. Irritated more than emotional, he muttered under his breath that people became too dependent on routine. His private attorney knocked gently before entering, holding a worn manila envelope with Ethan's name written across the front in careful handwriting. "This was discovered inside Miss Carter's locker after she left," the attorney said quietly. "It appears she intended for you to receive it eventually." Ethan accepted the envelope without curiosity, turning it over once before noticing the date written in the corner. It had been sealed nearly 4 months earlier. For reasons he couldn't explain, his heartbeat slowed. The room suddenly felt far quieter than before. Outside, thunder rolled across the evening sky as Ethan carefully broke the seal, unfolded the first page, and watched every trace of color drain from his face before he had even reached the second sentence. The first sentence was only 12 words long, yet Ethan read it 3 times before he truly understood it. "If you are reading this, I could not find the courage to say goodbye." His fingers tightened around the paper while the rain continued tapping against the windows, each drop sounding louder than the last. The handwriting was neat, careful, almost apologetic, exactly the way Naomi had labeled every pantry shelf and every storage box throughout the mansion. There was no anger in her words, no accusation, no request for sympathy, only gratitude. She thanked him for giving her stable work when she needed it most. She thanked the kitchen staff for treating her like family. She thanked the gardeners for sharing vegetables from the greenhouse every summer. She even thanked the security guards who always carried heavy grocery bags to the staff entrance whenever they thought no one was watching. Ethan slowly lowered the page. None of it made sense. Naomi had written as though she had known she would leave long before she actually disappeared. The date confirmed it. 4 months ago. For months before she quietly walked away without taking a single personal photograph from her room. He unfolded the second page. This one contained no explanation either. Only one simple request. Please do not spend time looking for me. There are people who need your help much more than I do. Ethan frowned. The sentence irritated him more than it should have. For someone asking not to be found, she seemed remarkably confident that anyone would search at all. His attorney stood silently across the room, waiting. Was there anything else? Ethan finally asked. Only this, sir. The attorney placed a small brass key on the desk. It opens a storage locker at Grand Central Station. It was registered under Miss Carter's name. Ethan stared at the key for several seconds before slipping it into his pocket. Cancel tomorrow morning's meetings. The attorney blinked with visible surprise. All of them, sir. Ethan rarely postponed business, regardless of circumstance. Everyone. After the attorney left, Ethan walked through the mansion alone. The house felt strangely unfamiliar. Without realizing why, he entered the library and instinctively reached toward a bookshelf before stopping halfway. Naomi had always left a reading lamp on beside his favorite chair whenever she noticed he returned home after midnight. Tonight, the corner remained dark. In the kitchen, the chef opened the refrigerator with frustration. Sir, I cannot find the homemade soup Miss Carter always prepared for your son on Wednesdays. Upstairs, 8-year-old Daniel sat on his bed hugging a worn stuffed bear. Dad, he whispered. Miss Naomi said everybody disappears someday, but good people always leave something behind. Ethan paused in the doorway. When did she tell you that? Daniel shrugged. Last month, after I asked if she would still read with me when school started again. Ethan felt a strange heaviness settle inside his chest. Naomi had known. Somehow, she had known she would not be here. Yet she had continued smiling every morning, preparing breakfast, organizing charity deliveries, helping Daniel with homework, and reminding everyone else about birthdays they constantly forgot. She had carried a secret that no one had bothered to notice because everyone, including Ethan, believed tomorrow would always look exactly like today. Late that night, unable to sleep, Ethan unlocked Naomi's personnel file for the first time since hiring her 3 years earlier. Beneath employment records and payroll forms was a folded emergency contact sheet. The name listed under nearest relative had been crossed out in blue ink. No replacement had ever been added. For the first time since reading her letter, Ethan wondered a question that should have occurred to him years ago. When the workday ended and the mansion lights faded into silence, where had Naomi Carter actually gone? The next morning began somewhere Ethan Kong had not visited in years, standing beneath the vaulted ceiling of Grand Central Terminal while thousands of strangers hurried past without recognizing the man who normally traveled in armored vehicles and private entrances. The small brass key rested heavily in his palm as he searched the rows of storage lockers until he found the matching number. For a long moment, he simply stared at the lock. Whatever waited behind that metal door had belonged to Naomi alone, a life she had carried quietly beside everyone else's without ever asking to be noticed. When the lock finally clicked open, Ethan expected to find clothing, suitcases, or ordinary keepsakes. Instead, he found one neatly folded canvas bag, a weathered notebook, several envelopes tied together with blue ribbon, and a small cardboard box filled with children's drawings. Nothing inside looked valuable, yet every item had been arranged with extraordinary care. Ethan opened the notebook first. It was not a diary. It was a planner. Every page contained reminders written in Naomi's precise handwriting. Monday, call Mrs. Alvarez about medication. Wednesday, deliver groceries to apartment 4C. Friday, read another chapter with Daniel before bedtime because he likes using different character voices. Saturday, visit Mr. Henderson at the veteran's home. Ethan slowly turned another page. There were no reminders for herself. No shopping lists. No vacations. No personal goals. Every appointment belonged to someone else. He reached for the blue ribbon and untied the stack of envelopes. None had stamps. None had addresses. They were thank you letters written to people she had never gathered the courage to hand them to. One was for the chef who secretly packed leftovers whenever she worked late. Another thanked the elderly gardener who taught her how to grow tomatoes in small containers. A third was addressed to Daniel. It congratulated him for becoming kinder every month and reminded him that strength always sounded quieter than pride. Ethan closed his eyes for a brief second before placing the letter back exactly where he had found it. The cardboard box held dozens of handmade cards covered in bright crayons. Every one came from children. Some had written simple messages thanking Miss Naomi for helping with homework. Others had drawn flowers, smiling houses, or stick figures holding hands beneath oversized suns. One picture caught Ethan's attention immediately. It showed Daniel standing beside Naomi in front of the mansion, both smiling beneath the words, "My safe place." Ethan stared at the drawing much longer than he intended. Daniel had never described the mansion that way to him. Beneath the artwork lay a folded receipt from a neighborhood pharmacy. The date matched the week Naomi had requested 2 days off because she claimed to have the flu. Ethan remembered refusing the request until she found someone to cover her responsibilities. According to the receipt, she had spent those days purchasing medication for another patient instead of herself. The name had been partially covered, but one word remained visible: oncology. Ethan felt an unfamiliar tightness spread across his chest. Every answer seemed to produce 2 more questions. Why had she hidden everything? Why had no one noticed? Why had she continued caring for everyone else while quietly carrying burdens she never shared? As he carefully returned each item to the locker, one final envelope slipped from the bottom of the canvas bag and landed at his feet. Unlike the others, this one carried a hospital logo in the upper corner. Across the front, in bold black letters, were 6 words that made Ethan stop breathing for a single unforgettable moment. Final treatment consultation. Patient, Naomi Carter. The hospital receptionist looked up with polite uncertainty as Ethan approached the front desk, dressed more simply than usual, hoping for answers that money alone could not guarantee. He quietly placed the consultation envelope on the counter. "I am trying to find Naomi Carter," he said. The receptionist's expression softened the moment she recognized the name. "Miss Carter," she repeated almost instinctively. "Please wait here." Ethan noticed something unusual. No surprise. No confusion. It was as though Naomi had become someone quietly remembered inside these walls. A few minutes later, a middle-aged physician entered the lobby carrying a thin medical folder. He introduced himself as Dr. Michael Reynolds before extending a hand. "You must be Mr. Kong." Ethan hesitated. "She mentioned me?" The doctor gave a small smile that carried equal parts warmth and sadness. "Not often, but enough that I recognized your name immediately." Ethan felt the room grow strangely quiet. Around him, "Where is she?" The doctor looked down at the folder before answering carefully. "I cannot discuss every detail without her permission, but I believe there are some things you deserve to know." They sat inside a small consultation room overlooking a peaceful courtyard where volunteers were planting spring flowers. Dr. Reynolds folded his hands together before speaking. "Miss Carter first came here almost a year ago after experiencing persistent fatigue. She delayed every appointment she could because she believed missing work would inconvenience other people." Ethan lowered his eyes. Suddenly, he remembered the mornings Naomi occasionally looked pale but still greeted everyone with the same gentle smile. He had assumed she simply needed more rest. The doctor continued. "When we recommended additional testing, she apologized for taking up our time. When we discussed treatment, her first question was never about herself. She asked whether she would still be able to continue working." Ethan slowly tightened his grip around the envelope. "Did she receive treatment?" Dr. Reynolds paused for several seconds. "Not consistently." "Why?" "Because every time we scheduled another procedure, she postponed it." Ethan frowned. She could have afforded it. She earned a fair salary. The issue was never money alone. The doctor carefully opened the folder and removed a financial assistance application that had never been completed. Miss Carter quietly redirected much of her savings toward helping several families connected through our community outreach program. She insisted that children waiting for medication should receive help before she did. Ethan stared silently at the document. The handwriting was unmistakably hers. Every section requesting assistance for herself remained blank. Every section allowing charitable donations had been completed. "She told us something I have never forgotten," Dr. Reynolds said softly. She smiled and said, I have already been given more kindness than I expected in life. If I have a little time left, perhaps someone else should receive the next chance instead. Ethan felt his breathing become noticeably slower. The doctor was not describing a woman who had given up. He was describing someone who believed everyone else's future mattered more than her own. Where did she go after leaving? Ethan finally asked. Dr. Reynolds looked toward the courtyard before answering. She said there was one last promise she needed to keep before returning for treatment. She never told us where that promise would take her. The doctor gently closed the folder before sliding one small photograph across the table. It showed Naomi standing beside a group of smiling children outside a modest neighborhood learning center, holding paint-covered hands and laughing as though she had forgotten every burden she carried. Written across the back in her careful handwriting were 8 simple words that left Ethan completely speechless. Some people only need someone to remember they matter. The address on the back of the photograph led Ethan to a modest brick building tucked between a public library and a neighborhood church in northern Manhattan. There were no polished marble floors, no private entrances, and no signs bearing famous names. The small learning center welcomed children whose families needed extra support after school, and laughter drifted through the open windows long before Ethan stepped inside. A volunteer greeted him with a warm smile that slowly faded when she noticed the photograph in his hand. You knew Naomi? She asked quietly. Ethan answered with unexpected honesty. I thought I did. The volunteer introduced herself as Emily and offered to show him around. Every classroom contained traces of Naomi without displaying her name. A bookshelf filled with donated storybooks had been organized according to reading level in the exact meticulous way Ethan recognized from his own library. Colorful art supplies rested inside carefully labeled containers. Even the snack pantry had handwritten notes reminding volunteers which children had food allergies or favorite treats for difficult days. She did all of this? Ethan asked. Emily nodded. Not all at once. She came every Saturday for almost 3 years. Ethan stopped walking. Every Saturday, he remembered countless weekends when he assumed Naomi was simply enjoying her day off after another demanding week at the mansion. Instead, she had spent those hours here. Emily opened a small office door and pointed toward a wall covered with photographs from holiday parties, science fairs, reading nights, and graduation celebrations. Naomi appeared in nearly every picture, never standing in the center, always slightly behind the children, smiling as though watching them succeed was reward enough. Most of them called her Miss Naomi, Emily said. Whenever someone asked why she volunteered so much, she always gave the same answer. Ethan looked at her. What did she say? Emily smiled gently. She believed every child deserved at least one adult who never forgot their name. Ethan remained silent as she handed him a worn attendance binder. Inside the cover, Naomi had written reminders for future volunteers. Celebrate small victories. Listen longer than you speak. Never let a child eat alone if they seem sad. Read one extra page when they ask. They will remember how safe they felt long after they forget the story. Ethan closed the binder slowly. The words carried the same quiet wisdom Daniel had unknowingly repeated only days earlier. Suddenly, a little girl walked into the office holding a drawing covered with bright blue stars. She looked no older than 7. Are you Miss Naomi's friend? She asked. Ethan hesitated before answering. I hope I can become someone she would have called a friend. The child smiled and handed him the picture. It showed Naomi sitting beneath a large tree while several children listened as she read from an open book. In the corner, the little girl had written in uneven letters, Miss Naomi says everybody has invisible heavy bags. We should help carry them when we can. Ethan felt his throat tighten. Before he could respond, Emily quietly opened a filing cabinet and removed a thin envelope with Naomi's name written across the front. She asked us to keep this here in case someone ever came looking for her, Emily explained. She never said who. Ethan accepted the envelope with careful hands. Inside was a folded map of New York State. Only one location had been circled in blue ink, a quiet lakeside town nearly 200 miles north of the city. Beneath the map, Naomi had written one final sentence in the same calm handwriting he now recognized instantly. Sometimes the hardest promises to keep are the ones no one else knows you made. The drive north took nearly 4 hours, carrying Ethan away from crowded city streets and into rolling hills where cell phone signals faded and life moved at a gentler pace. The small lakeside town looked untouched by the relentless pace of New York City. White wooden porches overlooked quiet sidewalks, fishing boats rested along the shoreline, and every passing stranger greeted one another with an easy smile. It felt like the kind of place where people still remembered birthdays without needing reminders. Ethan parked beside the only diner on Main Street and unfolded Naomi's map once more. There were no additional notes, only the blue circle surrounding this forgotten town. He stepped inside, where the scent of fresh coffee and warm apple pie filled the room. An elderly waitress welcomed him before her eyes settled on the photograph he carried. Her expression changed immediately. "You are looking for Naomi, are you not?" Ethan felt a quiet sense of hope for the first time in days. "You know her?" The waitress smiled with unmistakable affection. "Around here, everyone does." She invited him to a corner booth beneath a window overlooking the lake. "She came here every month," the woman explained. "Always ordered the same bowl of vegetable soup, always left a generous tip, and always asked how everyone else was doing before talking about herself." Ethan listened without interrupting. "Did she have family here?" The waitress nodded slowly. "Not by blood, by choice." She pointed toward a narrow road winding along the lake. "About 10 minutes from here is a small retirement home. That was where she spent most of her visits." Ethan thanked her and drove to the address. The retirement home was modest but welcoming, surrounded by flower gardens carefully tended by residents. Inside, a receptionist recognized Naomi's picture before Ethan spoke a single word. "Miss Carter," she said with a warm smile. She became part of our family. Ethan followed the receptionist through bright hallways filled with photographs of birthdays, music nights, and holiday dinners. Naomi appeared in many of them, sitting beside elderly residents, reading books aloud, helping with puzzles, or simply listening with complete attention. Finally, the home's director greeted Ethan in her office. "Naomi told us someone important might come one day," she said gently. She did not know when. Ethan's voice grew quieter. Why was she here? The director opened a folder containing volunteer records. "She made a promise to one of our residents almost 3 years ago." She paused before continuing. "A retired schoolteacher named Margaret Ellis had no surviving relatives. Naomi met her during a hospital visit and refused to let her spend the rest of her life feeling forgotten." Ethan looked through the records. Naomi had visited nearly every month without fail, bringing books, handwritten letters, family recipes, and photographs from the changing seasons because Margaret could no longer travel. Even after learning about her own illness, the director continued. "She never missed a visit. She told us promises become even more important when time becomes uncertain." Ethan stood silently as the director handed him a small wooden keepsake box. "Margaret passed away peacefully 6 weeks ago," she said softly. "Before she left us, she asked that this be given only to Naomi." When Naomi arrived the following morning and learned what had happened, she cried for a long time. Then she thanked every employee here for loving Margaret when she could not be present. Ethan carefully opened the box. Inside rested an old silver locket, a faded family photograph, and a folded note written in Margaret's shaky handwriting. Across the top, one sentence immediately captured his attention. "If you are reading this instead of Naomi, then please help her keep the final promise she refused to break." With careful hands, Ethan unfolded Margaret Ellis's letter, expecting instructions about a memorial or perhaps a final request for the retirement home. Instead, the first line forced him to sit down in the nearest chair. Before continuing, "Naomi made me promise that if she disappeared before anyone came looking for her, I would tell the truth she never wanted to tell herself." The room fell completely silent except for the soft ticking of an old wall clock. Margaret's handwriting wandered gently across the page, uneven but determined. She described the first afternoon Naomi had visited, carrying homemade soup and a stack of borrowed novels because she believed stories could make lonely days feel shorter. Week after week, Naomi returned, never speaking about her own difficulties unless someone asked directly, and even then she always changed the conversation back to the person sitting in front of her. Margaret wrote that Naomi had a remarkable gift for making people feel as though they mattered more than anything else in the world. Then the tone of the letter changed. One afternoon she finally admitted why she looked so tired. She told me the doctors wanted her to begin treatment immediately, but another family at the hospital had exhausted every dollar they owned trying to save their little boy. Naomi quietly paid several of their remaining medical bills without telling them who had helped. Ethan stared at the words, unable to look away. He remembered approving Naomi's annual bonus only months earlier, assuming she might finally take a vacation or buy something for herself. Instead, she had quietly given much of it away. Margaret continued. I told her she deserved the same chance to heal. She smiled at me and said something I have repeated every morning since. She said, if kindness only exists when life is easy, then perhaps it was never kindness at all. Ethan slowly lowered the page as memories rushed back with painful clarity. The afternoons Naomi asked to leave 1 hour early. The mornings she looked exhausted but insisted she was fine. The days she quietly skipped lunch, claiming she was not hungry. None of those moments had seemed important then. Together, they now formed a picture he had completely failed to see. The director gently broke the silence. She never wanted anyone to feel guilty. In fact, she made every one of us promise not to contact her employer. Ethan looked up. Why? Because she believed you already carried enough responsibility. She said your son needed peace at home more than you needed another burden at work. Ethan closed his eyes. Even while facing her own uncertain future, Naomi had still been protecting his family from worry. The realization settled over him with a weight he had never experienced before. All this time, he had believed he was the one providing stability for everyone around him. Yet the quiet foundation beneath his home had been a woman who expected nothing in return. As Ethan carefully folded Margaret's letter back into the keepsake box, the director reached into a drawer and removed a small appointment card. There is one more thing, she said softly. Before Naomi left town, she asked us to hold this in case someone truly refused to stop searching. Ethan accepted the card and read the handwritten note on the back. It listed the name of a small lakeside chapel less than 15 miles away, along with tomorrow's date and one simple sentence that made his heart begin to race. If I am strong enough, this is where I will keep my final promise. Morning arrived beneath a sky washed in pale silver as Ethan followed the narrow road toward the small chapel overlooking the lake. The building was simple, with white wooden walls, a weathered bell tower, and rows of wildflowers swaying gently in the cool breeze. There were no television cameras, no security teams, and no signs that anyone extraordinary would visit that day. Yet Ethan's heartbeat grew heavier with every step. He parked beside an old maple tree and noticed several familiar faces gathering quietly outside. Dr. Reynolds stood near the entrance speaking softly with the director of the retirement home. Emily from the Learning Center carried a small basket filled with handwritten cards from the children. The elderly waitress from the diner greeted everyone with warm embraces as though they had known each other for years. Ethan realized something remarkable. None of these people had been invited by wealth or influence. They had come because one quiet woman had somehow become part of every chapter of their lives. As the chapel doors opened, a volunteer approached Ethan carrying a sealed envelope with his name written across the front. She asked me to give you this if you arrived before she did, the young man explained. Ethan carefully opened the envelope. Inside was a single handwritten page. If you were standing here, then you ignored my request not to look for me. I suppose I should not be surprised. You always finished every responsibility once you decided it mattered. I only wish you had learned sooner that people deserve the same attention. Ethan paused, feeling every word settle deeper than the last. The letter continued without resentment. Naomi thanked him for providing steady work during years when she desperately needed stability. She thanked him for trusting her with Daniel, calling him one of the brightest lights she had ever known. She even apologized for leaving without a proper farewell, because she believed watching someone worry unnecessarily was a burden she could never willingly place upon them. Then came the sentence Ethan would remember for the rest of his life. Please do not spend another day regretting what you did not know. Instead, spend tomorrow noticing someone you almost overlooked today. Ethan slowly folded the letter as the chapel bell rang once across the quiet lake. Every conversation outside faded into silence. A small shuttle pulled gently into the gravel parking area. The door opened, and one by one, several elderly residents stepped carefully onto the walkway, smiling despite the long drive. They were followed by children from the learning center carrying fresh flowers gathered that morning. Finally, supported lightly by a volunteer but walking on her own, Naomi Carter appeared. She looked noticeably thinner than Ethan remembered, and the months had left quiet traces of exhaustion across her face, yet her gentle smile remained exactly the same. She stopped for a brief moment after seeing the crowd waiting outside. Surprise filled her eyes before gratitude slowly replaced it. She had expected a quiet visit to fulfill one final promise. Instead, every life she had quietly touched had somehow found its way back to her. Ethan stood completely still, unable to move or speak. For the first time since beginning his search, he was no longer looking at the woman who had once managed his household. He was looking at someone whose quiet compassion had built a family far larger than any mansion could ever contain. As Naomi's eyes finally met his across the flower-lined path, neither of them spoke a single word, because in that silent moment, both understood that some reunions begin long before the first sentence is ever said. For several long seconds, neither Ethan nor Naomi moved. The gentle breeze carried the scent of wildflowers across the chapel grounds while the gathered crowd quietly stepped back, giving them the space no words could create. Naomi smiled first, not with surprise, but with the peaceful expression of someone who had finally accepted that certain journeys always circle back to the people who still have something left to learn. Ethan slowly walked toward her, stopping only a few feet away. He had prepared countless speeches during the drive, explanations, apologies, promises, yet every carefully rehearsed sentence disappeared the moment he looked into her calm eyes. "I should have seen you," he finally whispered. Naomi shook her head gently. "You saw me every day." Ethan lowered his eyes. "No, I saw the work. I never truly saw the person." A quiet silence settled between them before Naomi reached into her coat pocket and placed a familiar house key into his hand. It was the key to her room at the mansion. "I kept meaning to return it properly," she said with a soft smile. Ethan closed his fingers around the key, but did not put it away. "Come home," he said. "Not because the house needs you. Because we do." Naomi looked toward the children gathered near the chapel steps. Daniel had climbed out of the family car without Ethan noticing and now stood holding a small drawing against his chest. He slowly walked over before wrapping his arms around Naomi as carefully as if he were protecting something precious. "I saved your chair," he said quietly. "Nobody sits there." Naomi smiled through tears she had tried so hard to hide. She knelt just enough to hug him back. "Thank you for remembering me." Daniel looked up with complete sincerity. "I never forgot." Those simple words carried more weight than anything else spoken that morning. Dr. Reynolds stepped forward only after giving them time. He spoke gently, explaining that treatment could still continue and that many people had already volunteered to help in whatever way they could. Before Naomi could politely refuse, the director from the retirement home smiled. Emily from the learning center nodded. The elderly waitress raised her hand. One after another, every person standing outside the chapel quietly offered support, not because Naomi had asked, but because each of them remembered a moment when she had carried part of their own invisible burden. Ethan watched in silence as the kindness she had spent years giving away returned to her from every direction. For the first time in his life, he understood that true influence was not measured by authority, wealth, or reputation. It was measured by how many hearts quietly chose to stand beside you when you needed nothing more than hope. Several months later, the mansion overlooking the Hudson River felt different. The routines returned, but they no longer existed because someone silently carried every responsibility alone. Staff members shared meals together. Birthdays were celebrated. Volunteer days became part of the household calendar. Daniel filled the library with children's books collected for the Learning Center, and every first Saturday of the month, Ethan personally drove there to read stories with the same children Naomi had once encouraged. The empty chair in the chapel was never forgotten either. It became a reminder that every person has a story hidden behind ordinary moments, and that the quietest acts of kindness often leave the deepest mark on the world. Ethan kept Naomi's first letter inside his desk for the rest of his life. Whenever he faced another difficult decision, he read the sentence that had changed him forever. "Please do not spend another day regretting what you did not know. Instead, spend tomorrow noticing someone you almost overlooked today." And on that day, everyone who had crossed Naomi Carter's path remembered what dignity truly looked like.